Hello again, and welcome back to 11-Step Meditation Foundations course. In this lesson, we're going to be covering Step 2 in meditation, and in this first section, more specifically, restoring myself to sanity. Step 2, as we all know, came to believe that a power greater than ourself could restore us to sanity. And as I work to frame the meditation aspect of the steps, I've came up with this, and it's evolved over time, and we can see how it applies as we walk through this Step 2 lesson. But here's what I have. Practice connecting with our higher power to restore me to sanity, to discover inner connection to our higher power, and to grow our relationship with higher power through meditation. Now I'll be covering this in the next few segments. So let's break this down into 3 sections. First, restore me to sanity. What is the insanity that I'm recovering from? It's not all the crazy, stupid stuff I did. And then, how can meditation help me with this? And what is this perspective, this change, this shift that I need to do? And the next section that we're going to take is power greater than ourselves. So in recovery, that we learn that we're powerless, but I need to turn my will and my life over to something. And step 2 is where it introduces us this concept of power greater than ourselves. And a lot of us come in with misperceptions of power greater than ourselves. So we're going to explore some different viewpoints and different ways to look at this, and hopefully help you in your healing journey and how we can work with this in meditation. And then lastly, came to believe. So for me, even though it's the first phrase in this step, I think it symbolizes not just this working this one step, but it symbolizes that this is a process and a journey. That I want to be a spiritual explorer and discover more about myself continually. I don't stop working the steps, and I don't stop exploring my relationship to higher power and to the rest of the world. So first, we're going to dive into the restore me to sanity in this section. As we covered in the first step, we have misguided perceptions of the world. We want to shift our paradigm of the world and ourselves. And so what is paradigm? It's a word that I heard a lot, and I looked it up and I really applied it. And Stephen Covey, great author, in one of his later books, The Eighth Habit, defines paradigm as a view, perception, a frame of reference, or a lens through which we view the world. You can also think of it as, what's the story that I'm telling myself about the world as I'm looking at it and my relationship to it? So restore me to sanity. It's not just not doing the crazy things. It's not just not drinking. It definitely includes that. We need to stop doing the crazy things. But at a deeper level, at a meditation, at a spiritual level, for me, restore me to sanity is becoming whole, becoming healthy. I like to look at the Latin root of words. It helps me understand where they came from and the deeper meaning. Sanitas, which is the Latin root for sanity, is health, good health, sanity. And if I look up health, it's the state of being sound or whole in body, mind, or soul. How am I going to restore myself to good health, restore my perception and frame of reference of the world, and restore my relationship between my body, mind, and my soul? So what is the insanity? For me, and I covered this a little bit in step 1, it's this belief and this sensation and this feeling that I am separate and alone. I don't know about you, but those last years of just drinking by myself, very lonely, and it felt terrible, and I didn't know how to overcome it except for drink more to overcome that feeling. And in some ways, alcohol and drugs, they help create an illusion that I'm not separate and alone. For a little bit, while I start to drink, I feel connected. I feel better then. I feel okay. For me, that's an illusion. And it didn't last long. And then I had to chase that feeling. And it just didn't work because it's an illusion. And for me, this is the root of our disease, our insane paradigm, our insane perspective that we're separate and alone. Now, as we covered in step 1, a lot of times we're hardwired this way from early on. And then I have this paradigm as I grow up that I'm separate and alone, and I have to create these tools to protect myself. And so all my fears and resentments and defects kind of arise as tools for living from this perspective of being alone, and I need to protect myself. Then I came here and stopped drinking, and I learned, oh, there are shortcomings, there are defects of character, which we'll cover later. If we can understand this, and so we're going to walk through some information on this and some different perspectives. I'd like to show you a video from a doctor, Dr. Larry Dossey, and his perspective on healing and overcoming this sense of isolation and overcoming disease.
It's wise to distinguish between healing and curing. Curing generally is just making a disease go away. Healing is much more profound in my judgment. I think that healing takes place when people discover what I want to call their non-local nature, the infinite quality of their consciousness, the capacity of their consciousness to exist infinitely in space and time. The realization that that part of who they are is eternal and immortal, is not born, couldn't die if it tried, and does not sign off with the death of the brain and body. I believe that the fear of death and annihilation is the cause of most suffering for human beings throughout human history and dwarfs the suffering that's been caused by physical disease. To overcome that kind of suffering is to achieve something magnificent. This, in my judgment, is what healing is all about. Helping people get to that non-local realization that there is a part of who they are that is beyond physical disease. That's part of their endowment as human beings.
Larry Dossey just came out with a book, One Mind, Part of a Greater Consciousness. And I really like the Institute of Noetic Sciences that produces these little 1-minute clips of science and spirituality, and I'll be using them throughout this lesson. They really call to me. I tend to want to geek out and understand how and why God works. I know a lot of people don't, so I try to keep it brief and not go too deep, but in the further reading in each lesson, I'll give some links if you like that. You know, as a Catholic, a converted Catholic, a lot of people of faith just go on faith, on belief and love, and that's all they need. And I know some of us, we have a different mix in the program, different levels of spirituality and awareness and perceptions. So we want to make sure that we cover all of this going forward. And just a note, when scientists, when quantum scientists, when doctors like Larry, they talk about non-local. Okay, that's their phrase for higher power or God, some universal connection. It relates to what I was calling spirit self. So we have our physical self, we have this false self that feels like it's separate and alone, to tie step one into this. And then we have our spirit self, which is this non-local higher level of self that we need to remember and connect to and work with to help root out the root of our disease and our insane paradigms. So how do we shift the paradigm? In science, every action produces a reaction, and that reaction is in exact accord with the action. In the Bible, Jesus tells us we reap what we sow. Same thing. Remember what we covered in step one, that our thoughts are things. We communicate those through energy, through chemically, magnetically, and even through biophotons, light. And a lot of that is communicated non-locally to that spiritual universe. So I've practiced the way I think, feel, and act all my life, and there are deep grooves and ruts. I like the yoga phrase samskara for energy grooves or ruts. And it comes from the Sanskrit word meaning complete or joined, sam, and kara is action, cause, or doing. So our actions are combined into generalized patterns. And if I do these over and over, every time I do them, I reinforce them, and I'm creating a groove that's difficult to resist. They can be positive. Just imagine someone committing selfless acts like Mother Teresa. Or they can be negative, kind of like the imperfect brain mappings that we got from when we were younger and even later when we were developing bad habits. And a lot of this is going to relate to our work in 4, 5, 6, 7 later, but this perspective, understanding this, and how we connect to higher power to overcome this is going to be key, and it's a key to step 2. We are working to restore ourselves to sanity. We're working to shift our paradigm from our false self perspective to a sane, whole, spiritual perspective. Meditation is a great tool that gives us practice creating this worldview. As I mentioned before, I call the self that I'm trying to remember and reconnect to my spirit self. This has been described as the true self, soul, and higher consciousness. And we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Not only do we have physical bodies, but we have spiritual bodies. And we forget that. The 12 steps, recovery, and meditation are tools to begin living as a spiritual being, my spirit self, and to remember that. This true self has qualities that are positive, loving, caring, wise, and unlimited. It is one with and in conscious contact with my higher power. My spirit self has been hidden and overridden by my false self or my ego for much of my life. I practice letting go of my false self in meditation. I can become the observer of my thoughts and life. I rediscover and reconnect again to my spirit self and to my higher power. I let go and I let God. I let go and I let love. In meditation, as I begin to shift from false self worldview to spirit self worldview, I realize that this is a spiritual awakening, waking up from the fog of the ego and moving into the sunlight of the spirit. A paradigm shift, a transformation. There is a vast spiritual unseen world operating in and around me. It takes a paradigm shift, a new way to see, to sense, and to begin discovering this spiritual world. So why can't I just change? I got sober when I was 39 years old. I had been living from this false self perspective for 39 years. There was a lot of energy or mud caked around my behaviors, my old belief systems, and my thought patterns. This spiritual awakening process is gradual for most people. Bill Wilson calls this the educational variety of spiritual experience. Some people have a sudden spiritual awakening, a sudden shift, where these barriers are quickly smashed. This is the sudden white light experience like Bill W. had. A regular meditation practice helps us to overcome habits and patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting, and provide us with this slow, steady, educational variety of spiritual practice and experience. So we had mentioned the samskara and the energy grooves or ruts. Well, in 1954, Roger Bannister broke a world record by running a mile under 4 minutes. Previously, studies had showed that human beings were physically incapable of breaking a 4-minute mile. Soon, after Roger ran a mile under 4 minutes, a number of people did the same thing. In Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, Roger Bannister describes his experience in breaking the 4-minute mile. No longer conscious of my movement, I discovered a new unity with nature. I had found a new source of power and beauty, a source I had never dreamt existed. Sounds to me like he had a step 2 experience, a spiritual experience, while breaking this barrier, a oneness. It helped him break the samskara of his old thoughts and even the whole world's thoughts and beliefs. We can practice having this spiritual experience and breaking down barriers in meditation. After Roger broke the barrier, all of a sudden people didn't think, I can't run a mile under 4 minutes. They realized I can do it, and they did. And quite often from there on. Just imagine, if I have a thought pattern that I'm always thinking, then each time I think this pattern, there is a light energy dust that gathers around the thought pattern. What happens when you don't dust a room for years? I would know if you saw my room when I was drinking. But the dust becomes thick, caked on, creating form in an energy field. There used to be an energy barrier surrounding the hopelessness of being an alcoholic. Dr. David Hawkins, in his book Power versus Force, points this out. Families, doctors, and anyone else could do nothing to help a drunk. When the founders of AA discovered a spiritual program for recovery, there was a shift that broke the energy barrier to overcoming alcoholism. People realized they could overcome and live with this disease. There was a solution. The shift happened. The samskara barrier was broken. Since then, millions have found recovery around the 12 steps. These step 2 lessons on meditation and the meditations that we're going to be doing will help you imagine and connect with your higher power as it is today. You'll be able to discover and experience the evolution of your own higher power. The 12 steps are described as a spiritual program. Spiritual by definition means not physical, unable to see, beyond our 5 senses. The gift of the 12 steps is that they suggest actions for us to follow. These actions change the spiritual, unseen aspects of our lives, and connect us with our higher power. So let's visualize the analogy of the ocean as our image of higher power. In our worldview that we feel that we are separate and alone. Imagine you are a wave in this picture traveling through the ocean. You sense that as an individual wave, you are separate and alone. As a wave, you do not feel a belonging to the other waves or to the ocean. Because each wave feels isolated, you develop thoughts and feelings about the other waves. One wave is resentful toward another wave because it is in front and larger. Another wave is worried about its ability to reach the shore. The next wave feels more attractive and more superior to the other waves. I, as a wave, have forgotten that I am just water. I'm a part of the larger ocean. I have limited my self-image to that of a single wave, my false self-image, when I am actually part of something much greater than myself. The ocean, my higher power. I've forgotten. I feel separate, and this has driven my resentments, fears, character defects. I have a mistaken worldview. How do we overcome the insanity of our false self? Well, the big book is pretty clear on page 44. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of a power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power greater than ourselves. So now that we've learned a little bit about perspective and paradigm shift, we're going to, in the next section, explore power greater than ourselves from a number of different perspectives. So we're not going to have a meditation after this section, but we will after the next two sections in step 2. We'll talk to you soon.